This is Gabriela on the scene today with Talk Network Radio. We have a real treat for you just around the corner, and that is Empowered Living with Jeff Byrd. Jeff is the owner of Jeffrey Byrd Coaching, and he will be coming to you weekly to teach you more about empowered living. Now, let's join Jeff already in the studio.
Hello and welcome. This is Jeff Byrd with Jeffrey Byrd Coaching, and this is Empowered Living. So glad that you tuned in today. We're going to attempt to take on what is a big topic and try to make some sense of things. This is going to be titled Making the Most of Your Difficulties. Now, every single one of us have difficulties, some bigger than others. Someone once told me that life is usually not like being attacked by a dragon. It's more like being pecked to death by a flock of ducks. And most people relate to that. It's very unusual that we have a big traumatic event on a given day. But now I know that some who are listening to this and some friends of mine are having very large traumatic events going on. And so what we're going to talk about today applies to those difficult things, the major health issues, the major losses. It's going to apply to those as well as the flock of ducks, the little things that just aggravate us and annoy us. They don't do us any real harm on a daily basis. It's just when they all kind of gang up on us, they can get to us and they can cause us to react in ways that aren't the best. I want to start as a point of departure with a couple of verses in the book of James. This is in James chapter 1, verses 2 through 4. It says, "Consider it all joy, my brethren, when you encounter various trials, knowing that the testing of your faith produces endurance. And let endurance have its perfect result, so that you may be perfect and complete, lacking in nothing." Wow, that's a pretty big promise. How many people would like to be perfect and complete and lacking in nothing? This is the only quality, to my knowledge, that is said to those things. The quality of endurance. Those who have endurance, who know how to endure, they end up being perfect and complete, lacking in nothing. There's nothing that can knock them off their course. There's nothing that can get them down and keep them down. They know how to get up. They know how to keep going. They know how to keep focused on the vision and keep taking the steps towards it, no matter what the difficulties and the obstacles that come into their life may be. Now, this word endurance, it's also translated patience sometimes. It comes from a Greek word called hupomone. Now, I remember someone saying years ago that the way they remembered that is that in basketball, the ones who make the most hoops get the most monet. So hupomone. And what it means is steadfastness, constancy, and endurance and patience. And in the Bible, in the New Testament, it is characteristic of a man who is not swerved from his deliberate purpose and his loyalty to faith and piety, even by the greatest trials and suffering. Now, so this is applying to a spiritual faith. Now, I also want to apply this today. I want to broaden that out and use it for faith in other things. Faith in your purpose, faith in your endeavor, faith in your calling, faith in maybe the value that you're adding to others through a new business you've started or through the business that you currently do. Because there's tough times that come in all of those areas. So I want to make this faith broader than just the spiritual faith and apply it to anything that you're really trusting for, that you believe in, that you're moving towards, that adds value to you and that enables you to add value to others. Now, some of you may recall there's been a movie written about her. The movie was called He Named Me Malala. And this is the story of a young woman named Malala Yousafzai, who's Pakistani born, and she grew up in the Salt Valley area of Pakistan. And on October 9th, 2012, as she was on the school bus coming home from school, her bus was stopped by a group of armed Taliban gunmen. And one of them boarded the bus and called out her name. Well, everyone froze. No one said a word, but one of her classmates glanced at her, and the gunman saw the girl's glance and identified Malala and shot her in the left side of the head and left her for dead. Well, now, amazingly, that bullet somehow veered. It didn't go straight through her brain and killing her. It veered and it kind of went down once it entered her head. And now it did damage to her hearing in the left side of her head and caused the need for some facial reconstruction. It did put her life in jeopardy for a while, but thankfully there were some outstanding medical attention that was given her immediately, and she was flown to other hospitals, and they were able to save her. Now, we would think that maybe that would have stopped her. And what she was doing is she was speaking out, and she was writing against what the Taliban was doing and how it was oppressing people in this area of the world. She was communicating with the BBC, she was writing, and she was actually naming people who are committing atrocities and human rights violations against other people. And so that's what got her targeted. You would think that maybe, and being targeted like that she would stop. No one would have really blamed her. It was putting her at great risk. It was putting her family at great risk. And you think maybe she would have stopped. But that's not what she did. She believed that her purpose was greater than her suffering, even if it cost her life. And she was going to continue to speak out for human rights, especially for the education of women. So she continued on. And the next year after that shooting occurred, she actually was the cover of Time magazine's 100 Most Influential People in the World issue. She was the cover of that. And then the next year, she went on to become the youngest Nobel Peace Prize laureate ever, and Pakistani-born one. And she won the Nobel Peace Prize, but she didn't stop there. A lot of people win the Nobel Peace Prize, and they never do anything very significant after except go cut ribbons. But not Malala. She kept on with her work, and on her 18th birthday, all this was prior to 18. On her 18th birthday, she celebrated by opening a school for Syrian refugee girls, and she enrolled 200 girls into this school on her 18th birthday. And she's gone on to speak before the United Nations and travel all over the world advocating for human rights and for the rights of girls to be educated. So what her story depicts a principle that's very important. And Chuck Swindoll said years ago that life is 10% what happens to us and 90% how we respond to it. And that's the first thing I want to mention today when it comes to how we deal with difficulties. The difficulties themselves are never our biggest problem. Our reaction to the difficulties is always our biggest problem, because the way we react either minimizes the problem or creates new problems for us. One of my favorite memories of my dad, and things that I most respect about him, for those of you who don't know me, he's been gone since 1990, but one of the things that I loved the most about him was how he learned to take responsibility to his actions. Now, I was a terrible kid in a lot of ways, and we didn't get along well when I was growing up, but I saw him take responsibility for his reactions. He had a little book by J. Allen Peterson. It's available online as a free PDF, but the name of it was called Your Reactions Are Showing. Your reactions are showing. And that's always our biggest problem, is our reaction to things. And he got a hold of that book and he took it to heart, and I was able to watch him transform before me, going from somebody who was reactive and who would stuff things till he got angry and have explosive episodes to control, who through God's enablement, he would readily attest, was able to get his reactions under control and not react in just a human knee-jerk reaction kind of way, but react in a way that was beneficial, that added value to the others around him, that improved the situation. So that's the first thing I want to give you, is that difficulties do not define us. Our reactions do. And the second thing I want to give to you today is that during difficulties, our goal should be to strive to be bigger on the inside than on the outside. We may not be able to change the circumstances, but we can change who we are on the inside. We can develop and grow to have better responses on the outside. There is no situation that you or I will ever face where we cannot grow on the inside. There is no human agency, no circumstance that can occur in this life that can keep us from becoming bigger on the inside and growing on the inside. And we need to remember that during difficulties. Some of you may recognize the name Alexander Solzhenitsyn. If you do, you may know that he was Russian-born during the days of the Soviet Union. He was Russian-born, and he was a writer. He was a spokesperson, and he spoke out and wrote very strongly against communism. Well, back in those days, that was a crime punishable by 8 years imprisonment in a forced labor camp. They called that the Russian Gulag. And he was arrested and he was put into prison for 8 years in the Gulag. Now later, he was released and he wrote a book called The Gulag Archipelago. And he, as a result, won the Nobel Peace Prize in 1970 for his literary work. And he would say in this book, looking back on his prison experience, "Bless you, prison. Bless you for being in my life. For there, lying upon rotting prison straw, I came to realize that the object of life is not prosperity as we are made to believe, but the maturity of the human soul." Now, here's a man who got it. He understood. He came to understand as a result of this imprisonment in a terrible place. It was like Nazi concentration camps. Many, many people died. They had open burials and just mass bodies thrown into these open pits, and it was terrible. He learned as a result of that a very, very important lesson, that it was what he became on the inside that was far more important than what he experienced on the outside, and this prosperity that we're made to believe is the most important thing in life. It's far more important who we are and who we are becoming. And I want to say that every situation that you or I find ourselves in is designed for our growth. There's not one situation that you're ever going to be in or that I'm ever going to be in where we cannot grow. And there's no better place to start to grow and to prosper than exactly where we are. Your current circumstance is the very best place for this growth journey to begin, which will lead to greater growth on the inside, greater development on the outside, becoming more valuable. And as we do that, then prosperity comes in, but it's a byproduct. It's not the main goal. When the main goal is in the right place, developing all that we can be, developing ourselves, as Scripture says, seeking first God's kingdom, and Jesus said that kingdom of God is within us. When we seek first that kingdom within us and seek to grow and develop and become all we can be, then the second part of the promise in the verse was all these things will be added to you. So when we're seeking the right things first, then it opens the door for the other things to come. But then when the things do come, they don't destroy us. We're able to use them rightly and for best purposes. Otherwise, as one person said, God's greatest dilemma is trying to bless us, is figuring out how to bless us greatly without destroying us completely. Because often if blessings come prior to our inner development, we don't use them in right ways. We fritter them away. We lose them. They destroy us. They cause all kinds of problems and relational issues in our lives. So the inner development is primary. Next, difficulties develop us into more valuable people who can add more value to others. There's a woman you may have heard of by the name of Corrie ten Boom. She was a Dutch woman living in Holland during the Nazi occupation. And her family was taken captive because they were hiding Jews. They were suspected of hiding Jews. They actually were hiding the Jews. They built a very tiny room in a bedroom, and it was hidden. It was behind the headboard of the bed, and nobody knew that there was an extra little room back there. It was called The Hiding Place, and that's the name of the book in the movie. And they hid these Jews there, and so the Nazis never found the Jews. All they found was extra ration cards, and that's what led them to be arrested. She and her father and her sister and some others. And just a few months after being arrested by the Nazis, her father died in a concentration camp. Sometime later, her sister Betsy died in her arms in the concentration camp. And you would think that Corrie could have become very bitter about that. But that's not what happened. She grew on the inside as a result of this experience in ways that are almost unbelievable. Following her release, she was released due to a clerical error. She was scheduled to be sent to the gas chamber the following week. Somebody made a clerical error, and she was actually released. Following her release, she didn't just go sit around, feel sorry for herself, or write books about how terrible her experience was. She went out and she started a recovery house project for war victims. She wrote over 40 books. She spoke, she traveled and spoke and shared her stories and God's provision and his miraculous sustainment of them. Even her sister's testimony, as her sister was dying in her arms, her final words were, "There is no